Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sheri.
And together, we are
the Traveling Professors.
Welcome to show number 95. Today, Sheri and I are going to take you on a tour of the rest of Pompeii. So this is Pompeii Part 2. And we're going to go to a couple of baths. We're going to go to some of the public buildings. And we will be going in several of the villas. And then we'll finish up at a Lupanaria, which is kind of a brothel, a small brothel. And then we will head back to Naples. So let's get started because there's still a lot of walking to do. I'm going to use the map to show you our route. We were coming back from the amphitheater, and I said that we were going to the main forum. But we actually stopped. We ended up stopping right here. This building, this is the Stabia Baths. And we went through it, and then we went down to the Forum, where we saw the Temple of Apollo, the Temple of Jupiter, and two other buildings. Then we went through the arch and went into another bath, where we went into the Forum bath. Then we moved on up the street, where we went to the House of the Tragic Poet. Then we saw the Caligula's Arch, and then moved on to the House of Fawn. Then we would have gone to the House of Vetti, but it wasn't open. And they've just recently opened it. But I do have some pictures of what it looked like prior to them closing it in 2003. So it's located up here. And then we went to go down to the Lupanaria. And we went through a couple of buildings down in here, including one unnamed villa. And then after being in the Lupanaria, we went back to the main street and then went back down to the train station. So that's our route. So again, here's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the Stabia Baths. Now this is the entrance, and the name of it comes from the fact that it's on two streets. It's very long, and so what you have is it's on the Via Stavinia and the Via Abbondanza. So here's the entrance from Via Abbondanza. So you go through to the little gate there, and you see the big open area in here. Now this has been around for a long time. There are actually 4 phases of construction on this site, with the earliest being 4th century BCE. So then we go into the entryway, come through an area where you see some of the stuccoed paintings on the wall. And they have a statue in here, and I'm not sure whether it was actually supposed to be in this room from ancient times, but they had a statue which was tied to the wall, so you couldn't run off with it. So here's Sheri standing next to it. And then we enter this room with the niches. This is actually a dressing room, and you can have there's a little bath in there as well, but this is mainly a dressing room, so you could have your little niches here. Here's a little closer view of one side of it. Then we head on down the hall, and this is a very large site. And they have it very well mapped out, so you can't really go wrong. So we exit through this door, and we come into another room. You can see where we're headed in here. This would have been another room for exercise or what have you. Then you can see the wall. You can see the different layers, the original, and then there's one layer, and then there's another layer over the top of it. And then we come into an area which would be somewhat of a lukewarm bath, and there's the wall on the outside here, and you can see quite a bit of the paint and the artwork. And here's a close view of the plaster work that would have then arched over this region. Then we head out into another building, and this building houses what is known as the Frigidarium. This is going to be a cool place. So you go in and it's rounded and you have this beautiful dome. But anyway, here's some of the niches off to the side. And here is the little seated area in the middle. And there's a view up into the arches. And then you look directly up and there's the dome with the opening for the light to come in. And then we come out and we're heading towards what are known as the Trepidaria, which is the lukewarm baths, and also the steam baths. And so in this room, you see these empty display cabinets. Now, this usually held some of the bodies of the people of Pompeii. Now, remember, they're not actually the bodies. The body was then covered with ash, and then it decomposed, but it left a vacant space. And when they were excavating, they would find these empty spaces. So they knocked a hole in one, poured plaster in it, and it gave the impression of a person, sometimes animals. And so you would have had some of those in these cases, and they've all been moved. They moved all of them except a couple of them that were on display in one of the areas in the forum. And a lot of them were on traveling displays going around the world. And I'll talk about that later. And what Sheri is looking at is this. And so we have, again, some more niches in the arch ceiling. And then we go out and you can see how they heated the area. This is the region where they would have had the fires stoking the heat to get the water to boil and the water to steam. And of course, this would have been all serviced by slaves down in here. And if you go to any Roman bath, you can usually see this type. Here's a little better view of the stacks of stone, and then they would put the wood underneath here and keep it fired. And then once we finished there, we went back out into the courtyard and went back out onto the street. First place we stopped was a water fountain. It's basically the water that was running there since ancient times. They have checked it all to make sure it's safe, so you'll find these periodically throughout Pompeii. I'm just getting a refill on the water container. And then we are back in the main forum. So here's the main forum would have looked. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this side and see the ruins of the Temple of Apollo. Then we're going to go down to the end of this and go into what is known as the Malchium. And we will also see a building that's on this side, which has it's been housing artifacts. It was never completed before the earthquake and the volcanic eruption. Then we'll look at the Temple of Jupiter before we leave the Forum. Our first stop in the Forum is the Temple of Apollo, which is located right here. Now, Apollo had been worshipped in Magna Graecia as early as 5th century BCE, but Pompeii was founded by the Samnites, and the Samnite period for this town would not have begun until the 2nd century BCE. So here you see a statue of Apollo inside the outer portico of the temple, a closer view of the statue. Nice bronze. And then here is a view of the inner sanctuary where the actual statue of Apollo and the worship would have taken place. Now, this was badly damaged in 62 AD, and they had not finished restoring the temple by 79 AD when Vesuvius blew up and covered everything with ash. Just north of the Temple of Apollo is the Horea, or the Forum Olatorium. Now, this was under construction and had never been completed. All they had managed to do is put these various facades up of brick, and of course then the eruption took care of that. The roof on this has been added by the archaeologists so they can use it for storage. So in here you'll see various types of pottery and containers, but it also has this figure from Pompeii's disaster, which is known as the muleteer. This is a gentleman who was found very close to a dead mule in his position as he dies. And then it also houses this, which is the dog that was chained up and died as a result of the volcanic eruption. And though, quite frankly, those were really the only two items that were available to see because of everything else on tour. And next week I will put in a short show, because we ran into one of those displays, one of those traveling expositions of Pompeii artifacts. And so I'll show you what those look like. Now we're going to walk across the Forum to this building right across from the Temple of Jupiter. It's known as the Macellum. Now the Macellum is actually the food market of Pompeii, and they stuck it in this part of the northeast corner because of two reasons. First, it's a supply center that was needed in the central zone of the city. And second, because its position at the edge of the Forum did not obstruct its regular functions. When you go into this area, you see right here in the middle this odd circle. Well, the center courtyard has these 12 bases, and they're part of the supports of a conical roof that was a 12-sided building that would have been used as a fish market. Then the rest of the square has these partitions where you would have different shops, and then at the end it has a fountain. So we were looking straight down the middle. So we'll go off to the right and you'll see the different partitions. Now one of them has been roofed over and they store artifacts in there. So here's an example of artifacts that were stored here, very similar to the one we had just looked at the Horea. When you go all the way down to the end, this is where the fountain would have been. We look to the other side, and there's another row where you would have had shops, although they're not partitioned. And then looking straight back down, you see one of the areas where it was covered, and it may have been that way up all the way around in ancient times. That still has some of the plaster on the wall. So here is what's inside of that one section of the covered building. So you see the beautiful stucco work and artwork that's there, and here's one of the other sections of the wall. So that was a food market in Pompeii. Now our last stop in the Forum before we leave is the Temple of Jupiter. Now the Temple of Jupiter was built in the middle of the 2nd century century BCE. It had additions added on to it about 50 or 60 years later, and the last expansion / restoration was done under Emperor Tiberius. So here you have the front section from a little distance. It had 6 columns in the front and 3 on each side. Here's a little closer view of the main steps going up into the center. And then as you get ready to leave, here's the wall on one side of the temple. And you see how high it sits up. And you see 2 things. One is the street. So here's the street that we're walking on. A little bit different structure. It's much nicer. And then we're going to be exiting out the north arch. There's actually 2. There's this one that's at the back of the temple. And then on the other side of the temple, there's another street. And it's in the front of the temple. We're leaving the forum and heading towards more villas at this point. Now that we're out of the forum, our first stop is known as the Forum Baths. But before we get to the Forum Baths, I have to show you the little restaurant souvenir shop. And this is right on the other side of the exit from the forum. So it was very nice and it was reasonably priced. You could get something to eat, you could get something to drink, you could get something to take home. Of course, you could always get the souvenirs outside of the area. That's where Sheri's hat came from. She realized as we're going into Pompeii that she needed a hat, so she bought her Pompeii hat. The Forum Baths were established when the Romans took over. They were established around 80 BCE, and interestingly enough, these baths were the only working baths left in Pompeii after the great earthquake of 62 AD. So 17 years before Vesuvius blew up, they'd had a massive earthquake that damaged the city pretty significantly. Now this bath also has facilities for separate men and women's areas. And they also has a latrine. You have to wander around the one side because there's 3 entrances for the men and 2 for the women. And we just went in the one that was opened to everybody. You really have to wander around a little bit. At any rate, here is one of the entrance halls that you're coming into from the park. You get into the building, and this room is actually a frigidarium. So you have this little semicircular area where the people would sit. And then you have a room where you have niches again. Now, these aren't just niches, these are actually Atlas statues holding up the upper petition. And here's a little closer view of the Atlases in their niches. And here's probably a little changing table area at one time. And then this is what it looks like from the front. They have this nice area with some more niches. Probably held idols. Then you leave here and you go through this petition into the next room, which is the tepidarium. This is kind of the warm room. So you'd have this warm water coming in here, and there's the whole wall roof coming in, the other bath that we were in. So that's just a real quick view of the Forum Baths. Our next stop is the Villa of the Tragic Poet, which is located right here. We actually have to go by the Caligula Arch, but we'll look at it a little bit later when we go back by it. And one of the things that's noted at this particular villa is the fact that the entrance door has this mosaic of the chained dog with the caption that says Cave Canem, beware of dog. Well, they have this blocked off so you don't step on it or anything. So you have to go down a little bit and then go up the street. And so here's the entrance to the actual Villa of the Tragic Poet. And it's pretty typical of the normal size villa. It's not as large as the next one, which is one of the biggest. The next one we'll be going to is the House of the Fawn. But you come into the atrium and here's the little garden area in the middle. And then off to one side is this niche, which is for the house god. And that's one of the guards there. They will answer some of your questions, but they really keep an eye on you that you don't do something stupid. And then we walk into one of the buildings and you see the original doorway where the Beware of Dog is located. And then you have a little bit of stucco here on the wall. And then in one of the other rooms, you have this wonderful section of painting. Now, most of the decorations in this building are mythological and they tend to cover the Iliad. And then here is the other section of wall in this particular area. So it was very nice. So our next villa is going to be the House of the Fawn. Our next stop is the Villa of the Fawn, which is one of the largest villas in Pompeii. And it's just down the street from where we've been. One of the things we have to go by is Caligula's Arch. So here's what Caligula's Arch looks like today. All of the external facing is gone. And then we come to the House of the Fawn. Now here, this would have been the original opening. So you go up to the main gate, you look through the gate, and you see the area that's partitioned off. And in there is a little mosaic. It says Ave, which means enter. Well, we obviously don't go through the gate, so we go around the side. So once you get into the area, this is what most most people see is the exterior, the little atrium, and you're looking out to the back. This is what it looked like in ancient times. And you can see the columns, the cover, the opening, allowing the rainwater and whatever to come into the fountain, which is our friend the Fawn. And here's a close-up of the statue. And then we start walking back through various buildings in the garden. Here's a nice little garden area. And then we reach for me, the highlight. We come to this section where we have this magnificent mosaic of Alexander at the Battle of Issus. So here you see one section of it, and then here you see the other section of it. And here's a close-up of Darius III cowering as Alexander is coming after him. However, this is not the original. The original is in the museum, and here's what the original looks like. So you can see it is much brighter. And then you walk through a partition to the back garden, and here you start seeing the columns for the back garden. And then you go further back. We're almost to the end of the property, and you see the trees and the green area. It was just stunning to be in this location. And then we turned around and headed back. So here we are coming towards Alexander from the opposite side. So you can see over the top, you can still see the mosaic, and then you see leading out to the exit. And then we come to the section where we're on the opposite side of the Fawn and then heading on out. And before we head to the house of the Vetti, I wanted to mention that we didn't have any idea who actually owned the Villa of the Fawn. It was a aristocratic Pompeian family, but we don't know who, and that's the way it is with most of these villas. But that place was built beginning of the 2nd century BCE, and it had a second addition done in the last part of the 2nd century BCE. Now we're going up here to this building right here, which is the house of the Vetti. Now we didn't visit it when we were there at that time because it was still under reconstruction. But there's been a video out on the opening because it has just in here in 2023 reopened to the public, and it is just stunning. So here are some pictures that I found prior to it being closed. So this is the atrium in the Villa of the Vetti, which is a middle class family, upper middle class. And then here's one of the rooms with its incredible paintings and frescoes. And then here's a fresco with the warship battle. So that's quite extensive. Now we're going to walk down to the Lupanaria. So we're going to head, we actually left the Villa of the Fawn. So we're going to go out and go down this direction. We'll see another building right in here. And then we end up at the Lupanaria, which is right here. So along the way, we found one stretch where you could see the piping for some of these homes. And this is lead piping. So here it is with the fence protecting it. And I was able to get a lens through there so that you could see it a little bit better. And then to show you that things can get a little messy, here is another section of pipe. And it goes in all sorts of different directions. And a close-up of it looks like this. And it's not uncommon sometimes to have the pipes with a name in it so that you know who actually owns it. And then we go down one of the streets. Here you see the street, and it has the little walk across stones. And then we come to a villa. In this picture, you can see the little atrium area. And then way in the back, you'll see this area. That is not part of this villa. It's in the next street. This is a little closer view where you can see the beautiful color of the tiles and mosaics that are on it. And then we went into one of the buildings, and you can see here the painting fresco on the wall. And then here's another view of the atrium area. And we went into this building here in the right-hand corner, and there is this beautiful light blue paint on the wall of this fresco. And then we have a well area, and then another room with frescoes on it. And then after we left there, we went out into the street, and this one really had been rutted up. And we start getting a little closer, and you can notice that the weather has started to threaten us a little bit. That storm never got to us, but it was a little scary there for a while. And then we come along another place where you can get water, a nice little fountain area. And ultimately, we end up here at a Lupanaria, which is a brothel. Pompeii was a town of pleasure, and there were all sorts of these all over the place, and all sorts of other things as well. And so there's a warning sign on the side of it that this is, it should be adults or what have you. And you go in, and you see these are the beds. Now, they're stone, but in ancient times, that would have been covered with a mattress, pillows, all sorts of different things. I believe there were 3 or 4 of these little rooms. And here's another one, again, that would have all been covered and soft and whatever else, and there was more paintings. The bedroom areas, or the rooms, I should say, they looked out. They didn't have a ceiling on them. They had an open door, which probably would have had some sort of drapery on it when it was in use, but there was no ceiling on it. And then you see above on the wall, you see these paintings. And these paintings are various sex acts that this particular establishment would provide to their customers. And they had about 6 different versions to choose from. And you would see them also when you came in the door. But one of the reasons you see this is a town where people visited from all over the world. And so they may not have spoken the local vernacular. So if you couldn't speak the language, you could point to one of these and talk about price. And then here's one of the different choices that you had. And then once that was over, it's time to go back to Naples. So we went back out to the Forum, took one more shot of the Vesuvius, and then went back and got on our train. Now, one thing happened here. We got on the wrong one. We got on the one going down the Sorrento, and I realized that quickly, so that the next stop we got out. And so did a group of people who were musicians. And what they would do is they would pay the fee, and then they would keep jumping off and on these things, and then go through the cars, play music, and collect tips. So the next train came, we got on, and then it took us back where we started back in Naples, and then we went back to our little bed and breakfast and had dinner, and the next day we got up and headed off to another stop in Italy. Sheri and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packet, and please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.